Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are live on March 23rd, 2023. I do want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the webinar facilitator for today. I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Before we get started, I want to familiarize you with some of the features available and how the environment works. If you look at the top of your screen, you will see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or just a hand. With that icon, you can either raise hand, agree, disagree, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you will see a box that says Files. Here you will find today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Simply click the item you would like to download, then click the arrow pointing downwards, and you will be prompted to save or print the materials based on your device's permissions. The second box that states Web Links to houses today's surveys, as well as any other links that are found throughout the presentation. Lastly, to the right of the screen, we have a chat box available. This is how you will communicate to the instructor and myself. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to interact by using the chat box. Simply type your message and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. We encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions or comments. Tech support issues should also be submitted here. It is with a great pleasure that I introduce Matt Ferguson and Darren and Samir. Matt, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm Matt Ferguson, and I'm a part of the team at the Loan Program Office at the Department of Energy that is focused upon the Tribal Energy Finance Program. Today, I will go through one application that seems to provide a lot of promise to tribal nations as they consider making energy investments in the United States. At the Loan Program Office, we have a number of financial instruments or loan programs that are to address a range of policy objectives that we've identified as a country, from bringing innovative technologies into the mainstream to supporting the development of advanced transportation, retrofitting former energy facilities, a number of things here. And we also have one program, the Tribal Energy Finance Program, that statutorily was established in the Energy Policy Act of 2005 and then funded in 2017. And then in the past year or so, we have updated the solicitation and received just tremendous response. One of the interesting things in this present period is that a number of tribal nations are really looking at whether it's diversification, increasing their overall capacity as a nation, leveraging capital, and forming some types of co-ownership or partnerships. A recent economic report drafted by the Wells Fargo Bank really outlines this very well. In the past year, the Department of Energy has restructured itself a bit. And in the area where the Loan Program Office is, the focus is on deployment. This is just an illustration of some of the offices that have specific tribal programs and liaisons. At the Loan Program Office, we work a lot with the Office of Indian Energy and Policy and the Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs group. The Tribal Energy Finance Program was recently amended in the Inflation Reduction Act, and we went from having $2 billion to lend or to guarantee to $20 billion, as well as our budget was increased substantially. So we have approximately $80 million to help to defer some of the associated costs related to the transactions, as well as support the administration of the program, and to possibly buy down or adjust if there are any types of credit costs associated with this. So many people have really looked at this and all of the other opportunities here as an opportunity that really demands the attention of a generation. As I said before, we started off with just a loan guarantee, and today we have a loan guarantee as well as the ability to directly lend. When we take a look at the district energy applications that we're going to be talking about later on, both of these options really come into play for a number of different reasons. One of them is just in the evaluation of whether it makes sense to get a credit rating. When we have an application that is over $200 million that we're guaranteeing, it is in that instance that we would need to get a credit rating. And then for direct loans, the transactions that are all transactions really are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. In general, the interest rate for the loan is between 3/8 and 0.5% more than the Treasury rate on the asset. And we take a look at the economic life of the asset, and then we add 3/8 to 0.5%. We're able to lend on a fixed term basis, and we're able to lend up to 30 years. 30 years, that's the construction and the operating time period. Tribal nations are able to request specific repayment terms. So, for example, if you would like to defer payment for the first year or so until the asset is somewhat stabilized, that is perfectly permissible. We, unlike any other lender, I believe, really are able to review technology and technology risk when you take a look at the engineers and technology professionals in the loan program office, as well as the support of the 17 labs of the Department of Energy. One of the key things for this is that at all times, the federal government does need to have a senior secured position on the project as collateral. Another key point is that overall, this model that we lend on is based upon project finance. That means that the only collateral and the only thing as a lender that we are looking at is the actual project itself and the cash flow or economic benefits associated with that. In a traditional project finance scenario, we are not looking to get any payments or get anything from the tribal nation. So overall, all of the tribal nation's assets are outside of the scope of the financing. Reservations are basically a type of campus. And so with that said, Darren and Samir, who will pick up shortly, have been developing financing energy systems on campuses throughout the country. I believe this district energy application can be used by tribal nations to develop their reservations' energy infrastructure. And I believe that this is also an opportunity for tribal nations to co-invest and to finance energy infrastructure off Indian lands. District energy systems provide heating and cooling to individual buildings across a reservation or any type of development district or boundary that's been established. Heating or cooling supply is produced at a central utility plant, and then the key thing is distributed across the reservation or district through pipes or another distribution network. So the key thing is overall is the distribution of the resource. But in the traditional district energy scenario, the centralizing the production of hot water, steam, chilled water, condenser water, or combined heat and power overall to individual buildings. Now that the individual buildings no longer need their own boilers, chillers, generation units, or other thermal infrastructure. So this is quite efficient, and it provides a lot more flexibility in the use of the building. For this discussion, district scale or district energy applications includes the electricity needs of a building. Technological innovations make this technically possible today, and the sovereignty of a tribal nation makes this possible from a regulatory perspective. District energy systems benefit from the efficiencies of coordinating across several buildings and facilities. From a financing perspective, the entirety of the energy infrastructure can be financed in one transaction, one credit agreement. With the Tribal Energy Finance Program, we can finance the construction and operation of the system for up to 30 years. So as tribal nations look at microgrids, distributed energy resources, tribal utilities, virtual power plants in their energy security journey, considering this application is warranted. In addition to all of these benefits of the system solution, this is most likely the most or more affordable transaction from a cost perspective, and it enables the tribe to most likely upgrade more energy infrastructure than originally contemplated in the tribal nation's capital plan. So our application process is pretty simple. In general, we welcome tribal nations and their partners to first begin just a dialogue and discussion with us. For tribal nations, there are an infinite number of pre-application consultations that are permitted. And then once the tribal nation feels comfortable with its investment, and we've kind of talked through what the application would look like in the time frame, the first part of the application is, well, really, we break out the application in two parts. Let me rephrase that. The first part is we take a look at eligibility. We take a look that this is an eligible borrower. Most of the applications that we have and that we anticipate having is some type of co-ownership arrangement where the tribal nation is in partnership with someone else, or the tribal nation has formed special purpose vehicles to support this. This also includes tribal nation enterprises and Section 17 corporations. So we just get comfortable on the overall legal structure that the tribal nation is using, and then we get comfortable as to this is an energy project, energy resource, and energy development. We take a look if it's on tribal lands or off tribal lands. When it's off tribal lands and the tribe is not owning it, it's an entirety. The review process is a little bit more stringent. And then once that is accomplished, we invite the applicant into part two of the application process. And there we're taking a look at basically with this project and the projections, the financial projections, is there a reasonable likelihood of repayment? This is a loan. And so we take a look at the overall financial projections and taking a look at the loan and the cash flows and learn whether there's a reasonable likelihood of repayment. In this process, also, we take a look at a number of other things, such as the engineering. A independent engineering report is usually needed at this point in time. The engineering report kind of lays out a roadmap for us as to the likelihood of being able to construct and place the project into operation. It takes into consideration the market, the interconnection, just a number of things here for us to not only know that there's a financial projection that supports this from an investment and a repayment perspective, but also we get comfortable that this is overall feasible from an engineering and a market perspective. Once that part is completed, you are invited into due diligence. In due diligence, we check to make sure that things are good from an environmental and cultural perspective. We go through the legal, further dive on the other components that I discussed earlier on, and negotiate the term sheet. This is another way of looking at that process there a little bit more. And we're right now at the yellow triangle on this chart. This program also gets reviewed by the Office of Management and Budgeting and the U.S. Treasury. So we have to do that. That takes a little bit of time. We try to have everything ready very early so that we're able to do this through the process here, and we're able to process the application in a reasonable amount of time. And then we provide a conditional commitment once this is all completed. And in the other parts of the loan program office, a applicant will receive a conditional commitment, and oftentimes having that, they're able to get additional partners or to pursue the project in different ways. I note here that we require a compilation report from an accounting firm. Since many of the projects, the economic benefits are based in tax law and tax accounting, we look for a CPA firm to provide the financial projections within a compilation report so that we can get comfortable that the economics outlined in the financial projections are applied properly. A last point here before I pass it off to Darren is that the Inflation Reduction Act also has provided access to direct pay, where tribal nations now are able to enjoy the face value of tax credits as a cash payment from the U.S. Treasury. I think you should plan on that payment being received within a 2-year time frame. When you take a look at that scenario where possibly 30%, at least 30%, if we look at the investment tax credit, would be rebated back to a tribe and our low-cost capital, it really provides just a tremendous opportunity to make investments in energy infrastructure, especially when the tribal nation owns the asset in its entirety. Thank you very much, and I'll pass it on to Darren.
Great, thanks, Matt. My name is Darren Lauder. I'm a partner with Foley and Lardner in our Washington, D.C. office, and I work on project development and finance for energy projects, often in the renewable energy space, wind, solar, biofuels, but also in the district energy area. So the campus energy projects that we're talking about. Samir Qureshi, who'll be speaking in just a few moments, and I have worked together on some campus energy projects. We'll be talking about one of those as a case study today, but I did want to give a little bit of background on kind of where these projects fit into the energy arena. Historically, energy projects were centralized power production facilities with long transmission lines. They would sell to a utility or to the wholesale markets. And they were complex, very expensive, very long development cycles. And they had not a different set of financing arrangements and possibilities. We have since moved more recently to on-site distributed generation facilities and other microgrid arrangements. So the campus energy facility is a modification of that. It's on-site heat, power, chilled water, steam generation that is managed on-site, often owned by the property owner that owns whatever the campus it's serving. And again, as Matt mentioned, financed based on the non-recourse project financing arrangement, in which the credit of the customers or the ones paying for the output is one of the key credit considerations. Since a lot of these facilities are already in existence, this lends itself to a public-private partnership structure, similar to what you might see for a privatization of an airport or a roadway, where a public body or a large entity owns an asset that requires ongoing maintenance and upkeep, and partners with a private firm that brings in additional capital and management to help maintain or often expand those facilities in ways that increase their effectiveness, often reduce their operating costs, and it takes advantage of the specialization of those entities that own those assets. So Samir works for Cordia, which is an entity, an organization that owns a lot of district energy assets. And he can put that in the context as he's talking through the campus example that the case study that we'll be talking about. And I think Matt touched on some of the motivations for working on expansions or financings, monetizations of these facilities. Some of that might be redundancy in case of a crisis or a catastrophe, so that these facilities are able to continue to operate. That might be efficiency. It might just be monetizing existing assets, so that there's often the model that Samir will talk about in more detail involves an upfront payment with ongoing service fees or payments required by the campus host. All right, so in terms of how these outsourced energy infrastructure assets and the transactions are viewed in the financial markets, it's interesting. There's a lot of warm feelings in the financial industry for these assets. So Fitch, a quote from them includes that a number of universities have entered into what they call utility concessions, which are ways of signing these long-term agreements, evidencing more interest of the public-private partnerships to replace or improve aging infrastructure. And then they highlight the fact that this provides that internal funding for capital expenditures, keeps the debt off of balance sheets that would otherwise be required to maintain those assets, and transfers some of the project's operating risks, infrastructure risks away from, in this case, universities to third parties. And I think then the thinking is also that if these are non-core functions, outsourcing these to a third party that does this every day in a number of arenas is also a helpful process. So that's Fitch as one example. Moody's had similar outlook that they're expecting to see increasing public-private partnership as they mentioned universities, but it's the same with a lot of public entities are dealing with aging infrastructure, but also trying to move toward a cleaner energy sources. And they noted that a number of universities have undertaken these monetization efforts and turned them into operating assets where they had operating expenses through a long-term partner and some kind of hybrid arrangement. And in fact, the case study we'll talk about today was not actually it was a private university, so it wasn't technically a public-private partnership, but it was an outsourcing arrangement with a third-party partner that brought additional capital. And then information also pointed out and highlighted Duquesne Energy and Cordia's predecessor, Clearway, that the CFO of the university just didn't want that liability on their balance sheet for the operating asset. So they actually sold the assets to a third party with a long-term service agreement in place to maintain and operate those and manage the capital expenditures on those as well. So a lot of different options available under this structure. So typically the way these are structured, given the offloading of risk and the partnership with a third party that brings additional capital, tends to have these treated as either credit neutral or positive, that between the payments made from the developer to obtain those rights and the long-term arrangement, that these are viewed as beneficial to the campus host. And a net plus overall. Similar, as we mentioned, the part of the value comes from the fact that the outsourced providers have multiple megawatts across the country, often internationally as well, that they've managed in similar arrangements, so they can bring kind of the best practices from multiple locations and some creative expansions and technologies and ways of planning for the future. We also see that in the case study example in terms of possible expansions looking ahead. And then finally, the thing that often gets attention is the upfront payments from the partner that's coming into the transaction. So we've seen some really big payments in Ohio State, University of Iowa. The Duquesne University was significant, $100 million payment. The University of Idaho, $225 million. This is one part of the process. I kind of liken it sometimes to an automobile lease. You can kind of make the payments whatever you want. That's just one of the variables. So there's a lot of other pieces to the transaction that are important and really critical trade-offs in terms of how the project will operate, how the risks and benefits are allocated, and how the capital is allocated across the partners. But I think one of the things that I think Samir will touch on is that this structure involved all of the stakeholders in the case we're talking about, which is Duquesne University, from the CFO and the facilities team to the financing parties, so that everyone was looking ahead to how the transaction would close. And in the example, here with the DOE, Matt's background and his team's background in project finance and understanding what the DOE's programs can bring to the table, when partnered with private parties, is very similar. And I think we're really excited and optimistic about where this process can lead. So Samir, I'll hand the baton over to you.
Thanks so much, Darren. And I'll just do a short introduction. Darren did a pretty good job of covering my background. My name is Samir Qureshi. I'm based out of New York City, working for Cordia, which was previously called Clearway. And this business that owns combined heat and power assets is one of the largest in the U.S. Was previously also owned by NRG, so had a lot of experience when I was at NRG for over a decade in our corporate finance group, working with the DOE on various projects and making use of that as funds. So it's great to be talking about this for a different asset class with some of the changes that have recently occurred. So as Darren mentioned, Duquesne University's plant was purchased by us for $102 million. This was the second deal in the market at the time. The first was Ohio State, and the check there was $1.1 billion. And we'll talk about what really determines the size of this check, but essentially tied to the operating budgets of these institutions. And, why did Duquesne do this deal? We had actually not approached Duquesne about buying the asset. We had a technical value proposition that we wanted to offer them that I'll talk about in the subsequent slides. And when they really started looking at what was happening at this plant, the workforce, and what we were talking to them about relative to delivering technical value, it became apparent to the CFO really quickly that the asset is probably better in private party's hand than his hand. So we worked with the CFO there, Matt Frisk, to structure the deal as being totally off balance sheet on the $102 million that he received. And he was able to transfer a lot of the risk on the property over to us. And I'll talk about that structure later slides and also contrast that with the Ohio State structure. So this is kind of I know we're focused a lot here on the financial cost of these deals and financial engineering, but at Cordia, we want to make sure that we're delivering both financial value and technical value. And the technical engineering is just as important, if not more important, than the financial engineering that we're talking about here. So in this instance, we owned a hospital that was not too far from Duquesne University that we had designed, built, owned, operate, and financed a similar type of asset, a combined heat and power plant, essentially supplying University of Pittsburgh Medical Center as a primary customer. And we were able to speak to Duquesne and explain to them that by interconnecting the asset, we could really unlock a lot of value for both institutions. And that's really where our conversation started from. If you're a private entity, you can't do the type of things if you're a public entity, you can't really do the type of things that we can do as a private entity. And so what we wanted to do was take these two plants, interconnect them, and unlock the excess capacity within it. The next part of the story here, which is not on this slide, is that downtown Pittsburgh, where these assets are located, had a dying district energy system. And since we closed on this transaction, the combined capacity of these two plants is essentially being extended out to make sure that downtown Pittsburgh stays on district energy. So we took what was here trapped, we extracted the value, and then we were able to then basically wheel those utilities downtown and support 15 or 16 buildings that would have otherwise gone off a district energy system that is currently in the city's hands and is at end of life. That's really a great story in terms of the full life cycle of these assets, the decentralization of energy, and then also looking at them in terms of how a private party might be able to extract more value out of these assets. So I'll talk a little bit about the financial aspects of these deals. Really, how is that payment determined? Why is it $100 million in the case of Duquesne, and why is it $1.1 billion in the case of Ohio State? What the institutions end up doing is putting forth a payment, and you can think about it as a lease payment. So they put forth a certain amount of dollars, and we go back and say, okay, based on those dollars, X, this is what we can pay you as an upfront payment. And these institutions were then taking the capital we were giving them, which was fairly low cost capital, and then investing it in their endowment and creating a large amount of arbitrage, which is one of the reasons why the rating agencies really view these as a positive transaction. They can be both cash accretive, you shore up your balance sheet with a bunch of cash, and you do it at the same time that you're transferring operational risk on what essentially are non-core assets for a lot of these institutions, universities, hospitals, and the like. And you're transferring it over to somebody like us that's in this business of operating these assets day by day. So as you think about these transactions, the value of it will be determined by the operating budget that you are willing to put forward in terms of receiving an upfront check, at the same time transferring that risk to a private party. So there's four aspects of these deals. The think of 4 kind of payment streams if you think about it between yourself and the customer. And the first is the capacity charge. That's essentially what I just spoke about, where you're making a payment and an institution like us is essentially providing you capital up front. And that can be structured any tenor that you want. In the case of Duquesne, it was structured at 40 years. The second aspect is O&M, operation and maintenance. You're able to essentially transfer all the operation and maintenance risk over the next 40 years to someone like us, and that's a big aspect of the deal for somebody whose these assets are non-core. And in most instances, we're able to extract more value out of these assets, as I had mentioned previously in the UPMC example. The third charge is consumption charge. So that includes things like electricity, gas, and things of that nature that are just passed through that we have to pay for, and those are essentially kept that way, passed through under these deal structures. And the last is CapEx, and this is a big part of it when you start thinking about assets that are 30, 40-year-old life assets, and you need to continue to invest and deploy capital against non-core assets for these institutions. We take that obligation on, and that's built into the deal so that we're funding the CapEx or are at least performing the work needed to make sure these assets are in good shape and renewed. At Cordia here, we've assets in our fleet that are over 100 years old, that are well maintained, invested in, and because we're always looking to make sure that we're growing these assets, and they're not coming to the end of life like they did in the Pittsburgh example in the city system. So I'm just going to compare a little bit. These are the 2 deal structures that are in the market in the campus energy space, and it's really just the Ohio State structure and the Duquesne structure. The Ohio State structure has been replicated over and over in other schools like Idaho, Iowa, and the Duquesne structure still stands as a unique one. We were lucky enough to be working with a CFO that was quite sophisticated and wanted to do a bespoke deal, not copy what somebody else had done, and do the deal that was right for his school. So both deals have a capacity charge. The tenor is 50 years in Ohio. It's 40 years for Duquesne. Both deals have an O&M charge. The difference between the Ohio State O&M transfer of risk and the Duquesne is there's an ability in the Ohio State deal for the private concessionaire to reset the O&M charge based on the actuals from the last 3 years. So you're transferring risk in a shorter tenor to a private party, and to the extent that they can't manage that risk, they're able to come back to you. In our deal in Duquesne, we essentially looked at all the operating and maintenance costs of the asset, and then we underwrote that for 40 years, just tied to CPI. So there is a full transfer of risk. We're not able to go back and reprice things if things are higher or lower. It's all at our risk. So that was a full transfer over the 40 years of the risk to us. The third charge is a pass-through, so I won't spend too much time on that. It's just a pass-through of the type of consumables you might need to run these assets. And the last charge is the CapEx charge. And this does get a lot of attention today, especially with some of the noise in the market that's taking place. At Ohio State, it's got a bit of a premium built into it in that it's capitalized 50-50 debt to equity. And this is how the private concessionaire really makes their return on deploying capital at this university over the next 50 years, which is quite significant. I think, I'm going to rough numbers here, but they've probably already deployed close to $400 million since the deal occurred. So if you start thinking about that over the next 50 years, it could be in the billions of dollars that could get deployed at Ohio State under this structure. At Duquesne, it was a different style deal. The CFO there said, look, I've got cheap cost of capital. You've got the expertise to execute on these projects, and let's set it up that you use my capital and execute these projects. And so that's how it's set up. We're not earning a return on deployment of equity through investing in these projects, but we are managing the CapEx risk for him. So that is probably the largest distinction as you compare models between the two. And with that, maybe Darren, if you want to speak maybe about some of the risks and how we structured this deal to make sure that we were mitigating them as we were negotiating the deal live with the school.
Certainly. I think this table outlines a handful of the risks inherent in these types of projects and how they were addressed in the case of Duquesne. So first of all, the design risk, the risk that the way this is set up might harm the operations of the university. And this was a very real concern. The university relies on these facilities to operate and to not interfere even during the maintenance or expansion of those facilities with the operations of the university. We had a similar concern. We worked with Salt Lake County in Utah on their convention center. They were very concerned that there not be any kind of maintenance that could put some of their events at risk, that some of their events that are critical and fund a large part of the budget for the year. So there were provisions in the agreements agreeing not to do maintenance during those critical times. In this case, on the design, the third party experience in designing these projects across a lot of different installations really addressed that concern on the design side. On the construction side, again, similarly, what are the risks? You're looking at cost overruns, schedule problems, interference with local operations, compliance with law and regulations to make sure that you're not putting either additional liabilities on the university or that you're not putting additional reputational risk or downside on the institution, so that nobody wants to be portrayed in a bad light because of the way this is being managed. So again, I think the critical role of using a established and reputable construction providers, EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction contractors, as well as local specialists, and that so that partner, and Cordia in this case, would bring its experience and expertise in things including local permitting and strong records. And there were requirements, for example, if this went offline, that the Cordia would be required to maintain operations, even if it had to bring in outside generators or other equipment, so that performance is also was maintained, which leads to the availability risk. So is this going to be continuing to provide the service that it has in the past and that it's expected over time? And again, same thing, using operators that are experienced. In the case of Duquesne, Samir, you and I were talking earlier, a lot of the team that was maintaining that equipment was already in place. So there's a new management and new oversight of the process, but a lot of the core team continued on at the same facility because they had been operating and running that facility as well. So a lot of times that's a negotiated or partnership decision as to how that gets done. The risk of demand outstripping what's available, and whether the infrastructure itself will be able to meet that demand. That there are arrangements under the service agreement to address that, and including incentivizing efficiency and making sure that both parties have the right incentives to use those resources, but to use them efficiently. Similarly, with the operational and maintenance risk, this is I think where those third parties can really bring a lot of value into the process, because they have similar experiences in other locations and in other applications. They can apply what they've learned there, the supply arrangements that they have, the technical expertise that they can bring as to how to manage these projects as efficiently as possible. I think is an important part of that, to make sure that if there's a shortage or a challenge of obtaining equipment or facility inputs, that they have relationships that can help to expand that. And then finally, on the financing risk, making sure that the funding will be available as needed to expand and refurbish and increase the capacity as needed. that's built into the process from day one in terms of the deal structure, the servicing agreement, the way that construction is handled and managed, and coordinating and cooperating with the third party advisors. And Matt, I know, lived in that world as well, and how critical that part of it is to make sure that the financing is sound fundamentally. And as Matt mentioned, a lot of the recent legislation has added quite a few incentives that would be available to help with these projects, including the flexibility in the way that the tax incentives are structured to be able to directly benefit entities like tribal entities. So those are a handful of the risks that are encountered and addressed through this structure and process. Samir, any battle wounds or stories you wanted to share about any of those? I know there was a process in addressing each of those in the Duquesne transaction, but I think overall it was pretty collaborative.
I would highlight that. I mean, this is an allocation and sharing of risk, and there's many different ways that you can protect yourself as an institution for that. So understanding while you're negotiating a deal that ultimately you are going to pay for that risk transfer, and getting some of that feedback live is a good way to negotiate these deals. Yes, it takes longer, but you can get to a solution and not necessarily have to pay a whole lot more. So it was a great deal for us to collaborate with Duquesne. We really felt like we were sitting on the same side of the table and looking at all the risks and making sure that we were solving for them to each of our liking. And so I wouldn't say any battle wounds, no. But I think if you can do these things at a collaborative approach, you can get a lot of capital in. You can transfer a lot of your operational risk, and more importantly, for a lot of these institutions where these are non-core assets, and you have the mandates to be carbon neutral or lower your carbon intensity, you make that the problem of somebody like us that's tackling that challenge every day, along working with the DOE, and ultimately these end up becoming really, really great projects.
Thanks, Samir. Matt, I think we are available to take questions. I had a couple of questions that maybe we could touch on as we're waiting to hear other things that people would like to dig into. I'm wondering kind of, there's a lot of structuring options out there in terms of ownerships, incentives, financing, and how those could come together. Is that in terms of kind of starting the discussion and conversation, whether that's internally within each tribe, whether that's with a partner? Do you have any thoughts about kind of how to get that conversation started?
Yeah, Darren, thanks. I think that's a great place to start. Unlike a grant program that is competitive, and there are a lot of factors to keep in mind about communicating and running a fair process, that's not one of the aspects that we have when it comes to the pre-application consultations and meetings, as well as in the early stage of the application. So there are generally two beginnings of a conversation. One of them is where the tribal nation will come to us, or will be introduced by one of our sister offices, and we just talk about like what the opportunity is. For example, here is what opportunity to possibly raise some capital by transferring the ownership of their asset, or to make an investment. And we discuss what their objectives are. And then we would, review the fact that especially with a transaction like this, it really requires a team. So making sure that they have in mind about having good experienced legal counsel, having good financial advisors, having good engineers. We would then have a follow-up meeting with their advisors or partners, and we would kind of talk through what they're trying to achieve. We would go through the flexibilities of our financing. I mean, one of the great things about the DOE program is that we are really able to structure this to meet the tribal nation's objectives here. And there are very few limitations on that. And then kind of talk through the timing and the application process. The key thing is that this program is for the benefit of tribes and for their investments in energy to participate more in the energy economy. And that's really the primary thing that's in my mind and in the team's mind as we have the discussions. And then we kind of take it from there and kind of move down the field as you would with any transaction. Another good point is that there are no application fees. I mean, in the past, we had application fees, but there are no application fees on our program. And so I think we're trying to make it as easy to begin the process as possible.
So Samir, you're seeing a lot of interest in different types of campus applications. What are some of those trends, and would it be helpful to talk a little bit about some of the disputes and ways to avoid that in structuring? That's maybe a second topic that we're seeing in the news.
Yeah, I mean, you've got two styles of transactions in the market at this point, and you have institutions taking them on for different reasons, whether it's making sure that the carbon neutrality problem is transferred to an energy company to solve, or to get an infusion of upfront capital, or the transfer of risk. You have the monetization of existing assets taking place, which we spoke about a lot here today. And then you do have, the greenfield aspects of the project, where institutions are looking to undertake projects that are quite significant in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and don't want to use their own capital, rightfully so, for it, because they've got alternative uses of it. And we're transacting and are active in both those instances. We do have a lot of these campus energy projects in the fleet, obviously, whether it's hospitals, universities, cities, and the like. So, tribal nations are kind of looking at this new sector supported by these dollars that the DOE has allocated is really an exciting step to be able to further, the ability to do some of these deals. The one thing I will say is these deals are complex. There's certainly a challenge deal in the market today that unfortunately ended up in litigation. And the only thing we'll say there, it's really important that you do the right deal for your institution. Just to copy another institution's deal is not the right step. And a lot of the advisors in the space have essentially been looking at the same deal model. We compared two of them today. And that's not neither to say that our model is better than somebody else's model, or the fact that we would use that same Duquesne model with the next customer. But I think the overarching comment I would make there is that, the next deal we do is going to have a different model. It'll be the model that fits the needs of that institution and their priorities. So looking at your energy infrastructure and understanding and making sure you're clear on why you want to do the deal that you want to do, and taking advantages of all the things that we spoke about is important. And then really you need somebody at the seat driving this process and asking the hard questions and learning more about these things, because they are complex deals to structure. But what you don't want to do is copy somebody else's deal and assume that that's going to work out for you, because their challenges might not be your own. So that's all I'll say about that, Darren.
Hey, Darren, it's Matt. Do you have any thoughts on taking some level of, I guess what I'd say is maybe incorporating some technology innovation? This is one of the things that's just very interesting here now, where just evolving from these old business models that we've had for many years to accommodate where you can use all of these distributed energy resources. You can incorporate more controls, take advantage of ancillary markets, all of these types of things. Do you have any thoughts on that? How to think about that?
Maybe I'll take a stab at this one.
Matt. Yeah. Go ahead, Samir, and I'll add on when you're done. I think you're in the weeds on this, Samir.
Yeah, we are. I will say that, I mean, the energy market is dynamic and it is changing around us, and there's new revenue incentives and opportunities that exist. And we do have assets that were built 10 plus years ago where none of these dynamics previously existed. But we're participating in things like demand response, frequency response, grid arbitrage, demand shaving. We have ice storage that essentially acts as a big battery to kind of make sure we get we're not using too many energy at peak times. So all those aspects are prevalent in these projects. And many times when we show up to a customer that is not an energy company, that's where the conversation starts. That's the technical value that we're talking about, and saying, well, why aren't you doing this? Because this is the incremental revenue you could be capturing. Or why aren't you doing that? And in many instances, when these assets are in private hand, they view that as sometimes as unrelated business income that could put their 501c3 status at jeopardy, perhaps, if they are looked at being doing something that's too sophisticated in the energy world. But what ends up happening is there's value there, and you're leaving it on the table if you're not capturing it. So I would say, Matt, absolutely, that's very much a part of the conversation. And as the energy markets evolve, whether it's storage or whatever the next thing might be, we're at the forefront of making sure that we're capturing that value for our customers and bringing that back. And is one of the bigger reasons why I think these deals really make sense, separate from all the financial engineering we've been discussing.
Okay, great. Thanks. Let me answer one of the questions that has come up on the chat. And so when we are funding construction, it's really based upon draws. And so you're submitting invoices and evidence of progress as it relates to the construction of the project. And then during the operation of the asset, we even do site visits. All of the projects that the Loan Program Office has financed in the past, we have an asset management team that monitors them and goes out and takes a look, meets with the operator and the owners. And so we're there. Historically, we have maintained participation in all of the assets that we've financed. This seems to be one of the factors that tribal nations like about our financing here, is that this is sometimes seen as an aspect of the government to government services of the federal government and tribal nations. And then our diligence process and a number of things here, we really try to be as pragmatic as possible. Not only do we monitor funds flow and all of that, but we also do diligence on the parties, their backgrounds. You'll take a look in the application that we we asked for quite a bit of information about the project partners and their relationships. So there is that aspect of it. And then another part is that there's some certain other representations that are made. And we take a look at the overall structure, the tribe's participation in the project, and at the beginning of the financing and what the intentions are throughout. We're very mindful of the scenarios here where sometimes tribes are not encouraged or permitted to fully participate in the transaction. And we take that very seriously, and we make sure that we maintain our dialogue with the tribe and their legal counsel to make sure that the tribe's objectives are being addressed, as well as their financial participation. While we wait for a couple more questions here, another question that kind of comes to mind is how does the utility that might be serving the campus play in some of these transactions in the past? I'm curious. Tribal nations have a range of relationships with whether it's investor-owned utilities or public-owned utilities. I'm wondering, what are some of the things to kind of be mindful of here?
Samir, you may have some thoughts on this, but I know in other contexts where we have kind of public-private overlap, there's often been historic relationships that don't necessarily make sense in the current arrangements. So for example, when we've looked at things like public housing facilities, sometimes they had a utility tariff that they have been using for 50 years, but it's not the best one for that property. So I think as you're looking at things that Samir mentioned, where you've got potentially you're unlocking value of things like storage facilities, ancillary services, demand reduction, where there's a value to a utility in some of these microgrid type services that there wouldn't have been an incentive or a reason to really maximize or focus on in the past. Now, when that's on the table, I think you can have a different conversation as in terms of looking at what the options are, whether that is the utility being involved to facilitate transmitting excess generation, or whether it's the utility providing some incentives under the storage or other technologies, or whether it's the utility playing some other role. It's probably useful to revisit whatever the current arrangement is.
Did you want to add to that, Samir?
No, I can echo the same. I mean, look, there's a lot of value that you can extract if you just step back and take a look at what's been happening historically on an asset versus what ought to happen when you do these deals. And sometimes it can be as simple as a bill. I think of Duquesne University, where they realized, and Pittsburgh got some of the highest increase in water rates in the country, that they were paying a premium rate because they're a higher education institution. That's what they were subject to. And us being an industrial user of water had a rate that was much, much lower. And so simply, this is one of those bills that I spoke about earlier that was, they were paying. And in this instance, just by changing the name of the bill to us and us paying the bill on behalf of Duquesne, we're able to make use of a lower rate would ultimately equate it to hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings. It's just something as simple as changing, a water bill and being able to utilize a different rate could lead to benefits. But the key thing is when when doing the deal and you step back and take a look at the relationships and the structures that exist on these assets and are able to give it a fresh view, you are able to capture value that otherwise you might not be thinking about or was not an option for you. And that exists in a lot of places. Again, the example that I gave of interconnecting assets and extracting value and won't happen everywhere, but you don't necessarily need that dynamic. There's other things that you can do just looking at these assets as an energy company that you can extract incremental cash value, but that the other institution might not be able to, just because you're in this space, you're looking at a lot of these assets over time.
Okay. All right. Samir, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. I just want to let you know that there is a question in the chat box for Matt.
Okay.
It says, "Good afternoon, Matt. Can you please elaborate further on the application's evaluation process for DOE's Tribal Energy Financing Loan Program? I believe there are 2 phases, correct?"
Right. Thank you. Yep. So the first phase is where we just take a look at the eligibility, eligible borrower. So in some of the conversations, and this is actually where I was going to go with this conversation with Samir and Darren, and that is we take a look at the borrowing entity. So, for example, if a tribe, for example, chose to co-own a facility, a district energy system with Samir, for example, we would, ideally the tribe would be the majority owner. That's like a very simple analysis there. And so when the tribe is the majority owner and a couple of other variables there, that you're able to have full access to the low cost capital of the Tribal Energy Finance Program. And then that also then, possibly unlocks access to the direct payment of the tax incentives there also. So we look at the eligibility of the borrower, and then we check to make sure that it is an energy project. And once that's done, then we go to the phase 2. And phase 2 of the part 1 is taking a look that it is overall a viable project, viable from a technology, getting the energy into the marketplace or the monetization of it in this illustration, because it's a loan. So we need to get comfortable that we will be repaid. And then we also take a look at the overall technology and the engineering and all of that. And oftentimes that is addressed with an independent engineering report. So that's we've kind of the 2-step of the part 1 of the first part of the application process. And once that's completed, then we go into diligence, and that kind of takes as long as it needs to. But that's the overall application process. Samir, when we think about for co-ownership arrangements, and gosh, I think I saw today that the Fed increased rates again. Do you have any kind of color that you can add as to what your thinking is in this environment?
Yeah, I mean, the original thesis, maybe I'll answer the question in 2 parts. The original thesis of why a lot of the traditional users have been doing these deals is to take the low cost capital that they have and invest that into their endowment. And then what we're saying is, well, the cost of capital is going up. And does this still make sense? Well, on the flip side, the return that you would earn in your endowment or in your investment portfolios is also going up. So
No, I didn't want to miss another. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, no worries.
I was.
I have to go to headquarters, so if
Oh,
you
okay.
still see me in the room, just get me out.
Oh, okay.
Did you get, what was her name?
Vanessa?
Yeah, no, the other lady had 2 questions.
Yes. Yep.
They answered them?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Mhm.
It's a good webinar.
It is.
I just,
No,
I think
I
we're
was
getting
trying to. I didn't see if I was trying to get people in through the email because I had some people that weren't able to get in. So I was
unable to get in because of something.
because they were trying
listed.
to. No, because they were trying to get
I
into
think
an old
it was
webinar.
I think we can hear you here.
Sorry about that. Let me get back. So, as I was mentioning, the original thesis still holds in terms of where the value is coming from. Yes, your cost of capital might be going up, but your return for taking the capital that you receive and investing it in your endowment or something of the sort is still there. That is still intact. We're earning higher returns than we otherwise were anticipating a few years ago as the cost of capital has gone up. That's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of these projects that's really interesting is the fact that, working through the tribes acting as a conduit, you are able to execute projects across the country. I think that is quite significant change in terms of what you can do here. And as a tribe, even if you don't have a project necessarily at your site or your location or your properties, the fact that you can partake in taking some of this value that has been attributed to tribes to access these dollars and use them in more of a conduit capacity that maybe exists in the private activity bond world is something that tribes that are sophisticated might also want to think about. If to the extent that you want to tap these dollars and get some of the economic benefit working with private parties like us, that's quite an amazing opportunity that has opened up.
Great. Hey, one other question. So we have an interesting part of our mandate, and that is serving Alaska Native villages and Alaska Native corporations. So on one hand, in Alaska, the overall structure of the way that the native corporations are structured is it provides a lot of flexibility, but at the same time, with this the environment, the cold weather, and all of the other aspects here, it seems that on one level, theoretically, this type of solution might have some application in Alaska. Do you have, Darren, you or Samir have any thoughts on that?
I think this is actionable across the country. I mean, Alaska is certainly one where it certainly also makes sense. Just so happens that University of Alaska is out there with their assets looking at a monetization and kind of insight. But I mean, the fact that we haven't looked at that deal is simply because those assets are more coal-based right now, and we didn't want to increase our carbon intensity in the company. Now, had that deal came out with the view that we want to work towards carbon neutrality and want to move off of coal and perhaps go to a lower carbon fuel in the future, then I think the deal would see a lot more interest in the market. And I think that's just, you have to be cognizant as we're talking about these projects, and the capital is certainly great and the support from the DOE is great, but you have to put them in context relative to the macro environment in the US and what companies like us are interested in and other institutions are interested in well. So in the instance of at least the one project we were looking at Alaska, investing in coal wasn't exactly something that we were excited about, but with the right type of deal structure and opportunity in front of us, I think could be really meaningful.
And
So,
Matt,
go ahead, Darren.
I'm just going to add, I think any place where there's any kind of islanding, obviously in the Caribbean where you actually have islands, microgrid type of assets are really valuable. And so I think to the extent that you have a lot of isolated locations in Alaska, this can really add a lot of value to wherever it's operating. So I'm pretty optimistic about that working, its way through. But I think there it does have to match the technology with the location, to Samir's point.
Okay. That's Samir opened up something for us that's really interesting. So the Tribal Energy Finance Program has been something in the works for a really long time, probably longer than we were aware of the impact of carbon in our environment. And so, with that said, we are able to finance carbon assets. We're able to finance oil and gas and coal, traditional energy solutions. So there is no prohibition from a solicitation and from a legal perspective of us financing these types of resources. However, what happens is when in the overall analysis, as far as reasonable likelihood of repayment and looking at the asset, the questions kind of come into, well, could this possibly be a stranded asset? Is what's the risk of a counterparty walking away from this? So it's been a really interesting discussion that we're having with tribal nations because, as you know, also there's probably about 30 tribal nations that have a history in coal, in oil and gas, and other resources here. And so there is an overall evaluation of exactly what the transition looks like and the speed of the transition. So on that deal there, Samir, it's very possible that if a tribe was involved or Alaska Native Corporation, that would be something that we would take a look at and try to assess the risk. But there's no prohibition for us to do that.
Good to know. Thank you, Matt.
Do you guys have any thoughts on? So you mentioned so it's interesting. Many years ago, I participated in some works with the Carbon War Room, and our conversations about tribal nations was a part of the island economy discussion because some tribal nations are basically downtown, such as the Seminole, and then other tribal nations are in remote locations. And because of that remoteness, they have somewhat of a island economy. But also, we have the islands of territories and Hawaii here. Do you guys have any thoughts on some of our island territories or island states?
Yeah, no, I can maybe take that, Matt. We were working at a quite significant project actually in Hawaii, using deep water cooling to kind of create this district energy type assets to cool Hawaii. Was economy is essentially tied to the cost of oil in terms of their fuel prices, and so we ended up actually not moving forward with the project, and unfortunately, that project was shut down. But now that I kind of think about this program and in retrospect and the type of dollars that exist here, it'd be great if this thing would have existed back at that time. And there's certainly other opportunities like that around the U.S. where islanding makes sense, where because of the remote nature of the physical infrastructure, there's things that you can do. And certainly in the case of that Hawaii project, which was over $500 million, where we were just taking seawater and cooling and intending to cool downtown Hawaii with it, it would have been great to tap this type of a program and actually have that project come to fruition. But I'm sure with these dollars there now, people are going to be thinking and giving things a fresh look.
And Matt, I was actually born in Guam. I left when I was very young, but those islands, again, similar to what you see in the Caribbean, a lot of the base load is very expensive energy production. So it's been a very fruitful place for renewables because it's not that hard to beat the base load pricing. So even expensive, wind or solar can often do it, and especially as the costs have come down over time. But I do think there are a lot of those opportunities. And to Samir's point, in thinking about the capital that's available and the flexibility with these programs in looking at especially co-locating or locating them wherever it makes sense. Doesn't have to be on tribal property. If it's a tribal project that's nearby, I think there are really a lot of opportunities. There's just been so much growth in looking at those renewable and backup and battery opportunities. I know that was one of the challenges when Puerto Rico put out their bids for solar projects, was that it had to include a storage component of some kind or a backup. That could be a generator, it could be a diesel generator as a backup, or it could be battery storage. Those technologies have come a long way since that was a few years ago. So I think there are the technology is evolving to really provide a lot more options, especially to your point, if you're able to combine technologies so that you can have fossil fuel technologies together with renewables in a way that makes sense for redundancy and dependability and efficiency in some of those places where you have very expensive baseline costs of energy.
Great. I'm gonna wind down with one last thought that comes to mind. And in addition to just all that's available from a technology, innovation, and finance and legal, there's also just the innovation of how we think about boundaries, right? And so that's part of this whole conversation about district energy systems and the district energy application. And what comes to mind when Samir was talking about this low and moderate income area is that the administration has a program called Justice 40. And as part of the Justice 40 is that 40% of all of the program benefits that the administration is advocating is where there is great effort to support so that the underserved communities, 40% of the benefits go to them. And some of the aspects of low and moderate income communities or communities that are not understood, such as tribal nations, is where the market or people perceive that there is higher risk. And so because of this perception of higher risk, service providers either are not going there or they're charging more in the services. And this is where our program comes in and can really be of benefit to basically the federal government is taking on that risk and highlighting it and, either buying down that risk or showing that maybe, this is a perception issue and there really is no need for the market to be placing this premium on serving this community, to address this overall market failure. So with that, I'm going to pass this on to our organizers. Thank you so much, Native Learning, for allowing us this opportunity to share with you all that we are able to do as part of the Tribal Energy Finance Program, and how another part that we do at LPO that, and this is evidence of it, is that we work very much with the private sector. We try to bring experienced and the best resources and talent to solve the energy issues of today.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm going to go ahead and launch the survey and just close up. If you guys would like to fill out the survey while I'm closing out, that's perfectly fine. Thank you again, Matt, Darren, and Samir for today's wonderful webinar. Truly appreciate it. Our next webinar is going to be on March 27th. It is going to be a guide to website development part 1. This is a 4-part series. It will be all next week. It will be presented by Lynn Wilson from Indian Dispute Resolution Services. As always, registration will be free. It will be at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Central, 12 p.m. Mountain, and 11 a.m. Pacific. Feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online on our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com. We have a Cathedra webinar tab and a recorded webinar section. You can click on any one of the webinars that we have done for the past 18 months. Feel free to view them and share them with your friends and colleagues. This webinar today will be posted tomorrow morning, roughly around 8-ish. So keep a lookout for this webinar. Check out our upcoming events as well on our social media sites such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Snapchat. We even have a podcast titled Hopathanga. You can find that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Once again, I want to thank you all for participating today and joining us for today's webinar. Thank you again, Matt, Darren, and Samir for your for instructing today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.